What a wildly entertaining week of college football. Let's start with UCF and Pittsburgh. UCF proved everybody that said they couldn't handle the grind of being in a Power 5 conference right, as they played two Power 5 games in a row, dominated Stanford, but when they went on the road to play a Power 5 team, Pittsburgh, who's a mediocre team, maybe third or fourth in the ACC Coastal, they lost, and for 85% of that game, Pittsburgh dominated and was clearly the better team until UCF rallied, and then Pitt won with the Philly special for the go-ahead touchdown. Oh, what an ending. That was dramatic. It was crazy. It was everything I'd wanted. I was hoping UCF would lose. Didn't think it would happen, but was pleasantly surprised. As for UCF fans, well, the difference for a group of 5 team between the New Year's Six and a bowl game like the Cure Bowl is not much. I hope UCF fans enjoy like the Cure Bowl against Troy or the Birmingham Bowl against Florida International, because that's probably where they're heading now, because I'll tell you, there are a lot of other group of 5 teams led by Boise State that are now in great position to make a run at the New Year's Six. Appalachian State, SMU, even Tulane. And so UCF is most likely, I think at this point, it's a fair bet to say they're probably not even going to be in the New Year's Six this year. So I don't want to hear anything else about fake national championships or being robbed or we deserve a shot out of Orlando because you lost. You had a great run. You still have a great football team, but all that talk and fake championships and whatever, it's over in Orlando. It's over at UCF now. It's all over. Moving on, Boise State won on Friday night, so now they're the favorite to make the New Year's Six, but keep an eye on Appalachian State. They have another game at South Carolina later this year. I think they'll win that game. I think if Boise State were to stumble, App State has a shot at the New Year's Six. They, of course, went into Chapel Hill, and as I predicted they would, in a result that is not really an upset, they beat North Carolina in eerily similar fashion to the way they beat Michigan in that famous upset in the Big House. Just like in the Michigan game, Appalachian State built a fairly big lead. Just like in the Michigan game, the other team, in this case North Carolina, came back, and finally, just like in the Michigan game, App State preserved the victory with a blocked field goal as time expires. A big win for Appalachian State and a tough loss for North Carolina, who's now 2-2. And I think that the South Carolina and Miami games said more about the losers, South Carolina and Miami, especially considering how they both played yesterday, than they did about North Carolina. I think people overreacted to North Carolina's wins. They've looked not as good the last 2 weeks. North Carolina, and I said this after the Miami game and after the Wake game, that if they keep digging themselves these holes, they're gonna get into one they can't dig out of. In the last 2 weeks, they've dug themselves holes they couldn't get out of. And that's just how it is. The big game on Saturday night was a little closer than I think a lot of people, including myself, expected. Georgia held on against Notre Dame. Of course, I will be seeing Notre Dame in person against my Virginia Cavaliers next week in what is, in my opinion, without a doubt, the biggest game in the recent history of Virginia football, and might even be, you could argue, the biggest Virginia football game ever. But that's a different story. Notre Dame was impressive, but their own mistakes and penalties cost them against Georgia. They had opportunities to win that game. They just couldn't cash in. So Georgia survives. Can the SEC get 3 teams in the playoff? I certainly think it's possible. Georgia, LSU, and Alabama, to me, are all worthy of it. But, I mean, would you want to leave out an Oklahoma or an Ohio State? That becomes the debate there. Who do you leave out to put in that third SEC team? So I just don't think it's going to happen. But I do think there are 3 SEC teams that have great shots at making the playoff. And speaking of Oklahoma, their arch rival Texas was able to survive their other arch rival Oklahoma State in a crazy game. It was not the craziest game of the weekend, though. You probably were not up for this, but Washington State led UCLA 49-17 with 7 minutes left in the third quarter. In UCLA's first 3 games of the season, they had combined to score 42 points. In the final 22 minutes in Pullman last night, UCLA scored 50 points and stunned Washington State with a 67-63 win. This now means that UCLA has 2 of the biggest comebacks in the history of NCAA FBS football, as they came back from a 34-point second-half deficit against Texas A&M a couple years ago with Josh Rosen, the fake spike at the end in the Rose Bowl. That was also crazy. But wow, what a way for Chip Kelly and UCLA to get their first win, and could that be the program-changing win that Chip Kelly and UCLA needed? We'll find out in the coming weeks, but that is definitely something to watch for. And Washington State should fall out of the top 25. Washington was a lot more dominant than I expected against BYU. I'm interested to see them against Southern California next week, who, with a third-string quarterback, upset Utah. Utah, again, disappointing. Everyone thought they were going to do really well this year. They lose, they get upset. That's pretty classic Utah. Speaking of another team that disappointed, how about Michigan? They got down 35-0 in Madison against Wisconsin. Yeah, there were a couple bad calls, but it was 35-0. That's not officiating. That's pathetic play. Michigan's defense was not good. Their offense was worse. They got tossed around like a rag doll by Wisconsin. And as I said, Wisconsin ran them out of the stadium. And Michigan is dangerously close to falling out of the top 25. I don't think they will this week, but another performance like that, say at Penn State, they'll be out. They'll be unranked. I don't know what, the Jim Harbaugh era at Michigan, for the most part, has been disaster after disaster. You can think back to his first year, you had the muffed punt snap against Michigan State, the 62 points to Ohio State last year, his struggles in big games on the road in particular. I mean, it's just been a nightmare for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and it's definitely mediocrity It's definitely mediocrity in khakis up there. Yeah, so a lot of interesting developments this week. Next week should be very fun. I can't wait to get to South Bend for Virginia Notre Dame, and I'll have a full preview of that game coming up later this week.